So after the death of Oliver Cromwell, the English Commonwealth really started to fall apart. It wasn't very democratic, and even though it was Puritan, it was maybe a little too Puritan. And really, the Civil War dragged on longer and more violently than people thought. And the problems that followed, including a large famine, it really made people sort of wish maybe they should have the king back. And so what you see after the English Civil War and after the end of the Protectorate is the reestablishment of the monarchy. This is known as the Restoration because the king was restored. Not the last king, his head got cut off. So instead, they invited his son Charles. Charles II had been living in exile, but he's invited back. Under they saw what happened before. They didn't want another absolute monarch, but they thought, if we convince Charles to be a good monarch and stay on our side, maybe things will be okay. And for the most part, he was. Charles II was often called the Merry Monarch because, for the most part, he did what Parliament asked him to do. Towards the end of his reign, it got a little more kind of dicey, and Parliament felt like, that Charles might eventually try to get rid of them. So they made him sign this act, the Habeas Corpus Act of 1689. Habeas corpus is a concept that goes pretty far back in English common law. Basically, it says that to arrest somebody, to keep them in jail, you need to have evidence that they've actually done something wrong. The king can't just throw people in jail because he doesn't like them. And this is an old idea. It really got first established or codified in the Magna Carta. But this sort of underscored the fact that Charles wasn't going to go around arresting Parliament just because he didn't like them. Now, when Charles dies, he dies kind of young and unexpectedly, and he doesn't have a living male heir. So the throne actually went to his younger brother, James, who becomes James II. And this starts to become a real problem. James had spent most of his life, well, a significant chunk of his life at least, in France in exile, where he adopted Catholicism. And he was a fairly devout Catholic. He actually ended up marrying a woman who converted to Catholicism. And among the Puritans in Parliament, who were still a majority party, this was pretty concerning. Plus, James, again, like his father, sort of leaned towards absolutism. He didn't really like Parliament or any restrictions on his monarchy. And when James's wife gave birth to a son, there was this concern that, well, what if we end up having a Catholic monarch in England again? Not only that, but an absolutist Catholic monarch. So some members of Parliament tried to figure out what to do. Now, James did have a daughter whose name was Mary, and Mary lived over in in the Netherlands. Netherlands didn't have a monarchy, but the stadtholder, or the elected ruler of the Netherlands, a guy named William of Orange, was known sort of around Europe as a strong Protestant leader, whereas some rulers like in Louis XIV in France were leaders of this Catholic coalition. William was very Protestant, and so was Mary, his wife. And since she was James's daughter, she would maybe have a claim to the throne. William did too, because he was actually the grandchild of Charles I. They were first cousins. There's point out that William married Mary in no small part because he would be able to potentially inherit the English throne, which he really, really wanted to do. And so some members of Parliament actually invited William and Mary to come over and basically take over the country. And that's exactly what they did. And this was what's known as the Glorious Revolution. William set sail from the Netherlands with an army and a navy and landed in England. And he faced relatively little opposition. That's why it's called the Glorious Revolution. There really wasn't a lot of bloodshed. This wasn't a long, drawn-out war. Pretty quickly, James folded and fled the country for France. He and his descendants would try and reclaim the throne, but they never really had a chance. And so William and Mary come in as co-rulers. So this is really the first time in England you've got a king and a queen who rule together. And this was partly as an agreement because they didn't really want to hand the throne over to a foreigner, which, the Dutch William was. But it did really, they were able to secure this agreement that the king and queen would rule mostly with Parliament. They agreed to this Bill of Rights in 1689, which is really, we talk about the Magna Carta as like a Bill of Rights. This really is the first codified Bill of Rights in England, and it guaranteed that Parliament would meet regularly. And essentially, from here on out, you've got this idea that the king and the monarch of England is constrained by the body of law, by the Constitution. And really, it's Parliament that runs the show. To sort of act as a go-between, it was going to be the job of the king or the monarch to appoint a cabinet, a group of ministers who sort of act as a go-between between Parliament and the king. And that really is a constitutional monarchy. If you look at England today, or the United Kingdom as it is known today, that's really the same setup. The monarch, in this case the queen, is head of state, but the state is governed by Parliament, by the upper and lower house, and it's the prime minister, the head of the cabinet, who really makes a lot of the decisions. So the origins of this modern sort of constitutional monarchy has its roots here in the Glorious Revolution.